you, which is really wonderful and very exciting. And it's wonderful to see all of those who braved load shedding to come out to the center. And of course, Myra and Richard, two of our trustees, and of course our guest of honor, Professor Rolf. You know, your surname is very difficult.
Wolfswinkel.
Right, okay. Wolfswinkel, okay. Who I must say is no stranger to Cape Town, and no stranger to the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center. In fact, he goes back to before we were even here, when Myra contacted Rolf at UCT to discuss with him and to talk about the Anne Frank exhibition, which Myra had taken on a tour around the country. Rolf was part of educating the docents and guides. And of course, he worked very closely with Marlene on the epic novel, which was reduced, I believe, to 1 page. And then, of course, my predecessor, Richard, you worked very closely with him, and now it gives me pleasure to work with you as well. Rolf Wolfswinkel was born in Amsterdam, where he studied history and literature. In 1988, he came to Cape Town, where he lectured at UCT. His dissertation, Between Treason and Patriotism, analyzed how Dutch literature was dealt with Nazi collaboration. Together with Dick van Gaalen last, he published Anne Frank and After, Dutch Holocaust Literature in Historical Perspective. In 2001, he was appointed as Professor of Holocaust Studies at New York University. And recently, he gave a series of 3 public lectures on Germany between 1919 and 1945. And I've said to him, the next time that he comes here, he needs to do the 3 lectures for us, which I think we would find very interesting. So we're waiting. He's now retired, although I know that he still does lots of talks, and he's often brought into the university to give guest lectures, and he lives in an old farmhouse in Connecticut with his beautiful wife. Tonight's lecture is entitled Anne Frank and the Recent Cold Case Investigation. As you know, on the 18th of January 2022, a very controversial book, The Betrayal of Anne Frank, was published. The outcome of the recent cold case investigation into the betrayal of the Frank family in 1944 has caused much debate worldwide. Do the results warrant all the publicity, or is it a rehashing of old theories and established knowledge, and long established knowledge? In his presentation, Professor Wolfswinkel will look at what is held up as a breakthrough in the matter of the betrayal and discuss whether earlier theories have now become obsolete. And it now gives me great pleasure to hand over to you. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to put it on to you here. Okay,
Put it on here, because when I can take off the jacket when I get
Right,
there.
so let me just see here. Untangle. Are you going to stay staying in there all the time? Okay. So we'll put one there.
Mm-hmm. And one for the film, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that that doesn't
Okay.
rub. Okay.
Okay. Properly dust out, and you know what? I'm going to take off my jacket. Makes me feel better. Oh, it's fine. Oh, okay. How lovely to be here. Thank you very much, Heather. Actually, I'll begin. The first sentence is, first of all, let me begin by thanking Director Heather Blumenthal. So that's what I'm doing. Of the Cape Town Holocaust Memorial Center, for the opportunity to speak here tonight about a book that has recently caused a lot of controversy. The book is called The Betrayal of Anne Frank, a cold case investigation by Rosemary Sullivan. This is the book. The indignation about it was first and most loudly in Holland, where scholars and historians felt upstaged. The Dutch publisher Ambo en Vos Books has announced that further editions have been suspended until, so they hope, the brouhaha dies down. But also in Germany, where everything to do with the Holocaust is always taken doubly serious for obvious reasons. In Israel, that considers itself the center of all Holocaust studies. And the United States, which has more or less adopted Anne Frank. A student told me a couple of years ago that she was confused. So it's a word that American students love to use. I'm confused. She was confused to hear that Anne Frank was not American. I had to disappoint her. Also nice to see so many familiar faces. Hello Myra, hello Marlene, with whom I have such a long history. In a sense, today's lecture represents a closing of the circle. It is for me almost like returning to the beginning, when in the early 1990s we all worked so hard to bring the Anne Frank in the World exhibition to South Africa. Pioneer days, indeed, yes. I would also like to thank Richard Friedman for his help in the organization of this evening. About 2.5 years ago, I got a phone call from the FBI. Well, not exactly from the FBI, but from an FBI agent. More properly, actually, ex-FBI agent. His name was Vincent Bangkok, and he called from Florida. I live in Connecticut, so that had to be serious. He said that before his retirement, he specialized in cold case investigations, long forgotten murders, drug cartel kidnappings, or corruption scandal, which became the subject of new research with the help of modern techniques. Profiling, DNA databanks, forensic research, artificial intelligence, algorithms. It all contributed to cast new and sometimes unexpected light on old cases. Why did he call me, and what could I do for him? He told me he had been approached by people in Holland, a little more about that in a moment, who had decided that they wanted to solve the 75-year-old riddle of the betrayal of Anne Frank and her family and the other 4 people hiding from the Nazis in the annex to the house on Prinsengracht 263 in Amsterdam. They had been referred to Bangkok by an acquaintance of theirs from the police in Holland. In his early investigations, he had come across my name as a friend of Miep Gies. Maybe I do not have to say in this company who Miep Gies was, but Miep was the helper, one of the 4 helpers who made the 8 people in the annex survive the war, survive the hiding until they didn't. So Miep was certainly in the late 1980s and early 1990s, almost the only one who was still alive who could be counted as a first primary source. So he had come across my name as a friend of Miep Gies, and of course she would be one of the main sources in the new investigation. She died, by the way, in 2010, 100 years old. But there were many references, books, documentaries, articles, where her voice and her story could be heard. One of those was her speech on the occasion of the granting of the Raoul Wallenberg Award by the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor in 1949. The whole event, for those of you who want to see it, the whole event is still available on YouTube. Just type in Miep Gies Wallenberg speech and you get the whole thing, 1.5 hours. I accompanied her on that trip. UCT had granted me special permission to travel from Cape Town to Amsterdam, pick her up there, travel with her to Detroit, and from there to Ann Arbor. I served as her translator, resident historian, bellboy, and general factotum. I loved it, as you soon will see. As you can imagine, we talked a lot about all kinds of things during those long flights and car rides, and it was about those talks Bangkok wanted to pick my brain. What had Miep said about the events on that Friday, August 4th, 1944, and in particular about the betrayal? I would now like to invite you to take a good look at the following clip of the recording of that evening. First, we're not going to show the 1.5 hours. First, Miep is awarded the Wallenberg Award. Then she reads from a prepared speech, after which I ask the audience to join in a question and answer session. Yes? Make it louder.
What gave the Franks the
What? For all of you, the little gentleman here in the front asks, what gave the Franks away? I suppose that is a question that will take the rest of the evening. At least, not the question, but the answer. So, Miep?
Wat vroegen ze?
Wie heeft de Franks verraden?
That is a question. Dat moet je vertalen. After the war was over, we went to the police, and de police onderzocht het wie de dader was. Er waren verschillende veronderstellingen, onder andere de huismeester.
The police investigated the matter and found that there were a few hypotheses, but the strongest suspicion was held against the housemaster.
De politie had het zo druk na de oorlog met al de mensen die kwamen zeggen dat hun buurman niet goed was en dat die niet goed was. Dus dat werd een beetje slordig gedaan.
There were so many cases after the war of people who accused their neighbors of having done bad things during the war, that those investigations that were done just after the war were not done too well, a bit shoddily. If I may add something of my own, there were, just to give you an impression, there were, after the war, 400,000 cases against people to be investigated. Almost 500,000 cases.
And after 15 years, when it was quiet, because we were sick of the war, we began again to search to this traitor.
Yeah.
But that was 1960. And in this time, the betrayer had died. But who it was, we didn't know. I have only veronderstellingen.
Suppose.
I have only supposed. But what can I do now? The people had died. And Mr. Frank always said to me, Miep, I never want to know the name of this betrayer, because these people is too low for me. I did not want to know it. And I did not become my children and my vrouw, and my woman. And also after the war, when we were looking for the man who arrested us, that was Silberbauer in Vienna, and Mr. Wiesenthal searched this man, but he did not know his name. And he went to Otto Frank and asked the name. And Otto Frank gave a wrong name of this. But Wiesenthal was looking forwards a whole year. And when he found him, he went to him. And after I asked Otto, why did you not tell me the true name of this? Why did you not tell the true name to Wiesenthal? I said, Miep, listen. The children of this man must go over the well. And I did not want that they were blamed for his father. Begrijpt u dat nu?
Mm-hmm.
Zou ze het verstaan?
Yeah, have you understood? So we have to resign ourselves to the fact that we will never know who did it. There have been suspicions, but we will never be able to prove anything.
But this Silberbauer, he was a policeman. He did not work for a year in the country. Hij mocht hier een jaar niet werken.
Yeah, he was not allowed to serve as a policeman for a year until the investigation against him was completed. Yes?
You speak of how Anne Frank is always happy.
Okay. So, I wanted you to see that moment that the cold case investigation makes a lot of, where Miep says, and in 1960, the betrayer, as she calls it, the betrayer had died. In other words, the cold case team takes that as that she knew who betrayed the Franks. I believe there's actually a lot of other possible interpretations, but we'll come to that in a moment. So, and she also said, by this time the betrayer had died, but who it was, we didn't know. Okay. Indeed, I must say, ambiguous, to say the least. A brief reminder of the background story for those of you who are not new to this, but would like a bit of freshening up. Holland ceased to be an independent country on May 10, 1940. On that day, German troops crossed the border and proceeded to occupy the country, like they had done earlier in Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Norway and Denmark. Belgium, Luxembourg and France would soon follow. Queen Wilhelmina and the government fled to England, leaving the country in a state of confusion and disarray. Nowhere, obviously, was the fear and anxiety greater than among the Jewish part of the population. There were, at that time, about 140,000 Jews in Holland, of which 25,000 to 30,000 had arrived between 1933 and 1940, mainly from Austria and Germany. Otto Frank, his wife Edith, and his two daughters, Margot and Anne, were among them. The big question was, would the German administration introduce the same harsh anti-Jewish policies in the Netherlands that they had done earlier in Germany? The answer was not long in coming. As soon as October 1940, Jewish civil servants were removed from their jobs, including professors and teachers. It caused some protest and one heroic act. from Professor Rudolf Cleveringa, Dean of the Law Faculty of the University of Leiden, who publicly criticized the expulsion of his Jewish colleagues. It led to the closure of the university for the duration of the war and the internment of Professor Cleveringa. But by now, most people were sufficiently intimidated to lay low and not speak up. So when Jewish students could no longer attend the same classes as their non-Jewish colleagues, it hardly caused a ripple. Margot and Otto Frank both went to the Jewish Lyceum in Amsterdam, where ironically the standard of education was much higher than in similar Dutch institutions because of the high number of university lecturers and professors who had just been fired from their jobs a few months earlier. It only lasted a year. Early July 1942, Margot, now 16, received an order to travel to an assembly center for a labor camp in Germany. It was the sign for Otto Frank that he and his family had to disappear from public view, go into hiding, in other words. The rumor was spread that they had gone to his family in Switzerland. In reality, he had been preparing a move to the apartment behind his office and warehouse. For months, he and his nearest colleagues, Victor Kugler, Johannes Kleiman, Beb Voskuil and Miep Gies, had been preparing the space for the Frank family and their friends Herman van Pels, Augusta van Pels and their son Peter van Pels. Later, Fritz Pfeffer, a dentist, the dentist of the Van Pels family and of Miep Gies, would join them. The 4 helpers would be responsible for keeping these 8 people alive. All went well for more than 2 years. While all around them Amsterdam was suffering the loss and more and more of its Jewish residents, life in the Achterhuis appeared almost sedate, literally otherworldly. After the invasion in Normandy on June 6, 1944, it only seemed a matter of time before the Nazis would be defeated and things could return to normal. Anne was looking forward to soon going back to school, maybe as early as September. But it all went horribly wrong. On August 4th, 1944, a Friday, at 10:30 in the morning, 3 Dutch policemen, commanded by a German police sergeant, Joseph Karl Sielbauer, you just heard Miep talk about him, entered the apartment behind the secret bookcase and arrested the 8 inhabitants living behind it. Only one, Otto, would survive. The others died in German concentration camps. Auschwitz, where Edith Frank and Herman van Pels died, Bergen-Belsen, where Margot and Anne died, Neuengamme, Fritz Pfeffer died there, Theresienstadt, August van Pels died there, and Mauthausen, Peter van Pels. We now enter the subject of the cold case. During their trial after the war, the policeman who had participated in the raid, Karl Sielbauer as the commanding officer, Willem Grotendorst, Gesine Schringhuis, and another unidentified policeman, they all testified that they thought that Karl Sielbauer had acted on an anonymous phone call that morning. So, who was the caller? That question has puzzled many people and has led to at least 2 official investigations into the possible betrayer, one in 1947, one in 1963. Both times it was to find out more about the warehouse below the annex. Both times, however, with the same outcome: he was not convicted and he died in 1971. Over the years, a number of other names have appeared as possible anonymous callers. Tony Ahlers, Hans van Dijk, Lena Hartog, Nelly Voskuil, to name only the more probable. But most of them had to be discarded after further research. So these names do not include the name of the man who was obsessed with the idea that it was his aunt who had betrayed the Franks, or the man who ratted out his neighbors, hoping to get their apartment. Let's start with Van Maren. What was the evidence against him, and why did it not lead to a conviction? I have always thought that the case against Van Maren was actually the strongest and most promising. Anna wrote in her diary about hearing of suspicious actions by one of the men, Van Maren, working in the warehouse downstairs. He would leave a pencil standing upright on a table, in case one of the people in the apartment above would stumble against the table in the dark at night, when it was possible to walk around a bit. Or he would sprinkle flour on the floor to catch footsteps, for the same reason. During his trials, he would explain those actions as efforts to prove the warehouse was burgled during the night, as indeed happened on 1 or 2 occasions. Anyway, in both investigations, reasonable doubt remained, and there was the fact that Miep always categorically denied it was Van Maren, even though she didn't like him. She still maintained it wasn't him. Was that perhaps, I'm just passing that thought on, was that perhaps because she knew who made the call? We come to it. I recently learned from the cold case team that a suspect in any case is judged by 3 main criteria: knowledge, motive, and opportunity. In other words, how did a person gain the knowledge? Could he or she have a motive for the betrayal? Did he or she have the opportunity to commit the offense? That last consideration, for instance, decided the case against Hans van Dijk. She may have known or heard about people hiding at the Prinsengracht 263, and as a trusted V-Frau, I'll come back to that in a moment, who had betrayed many Jews to the Germans, she certainly had a motive. But at the time of the call, she was not in Amsterdam. So that let her off the hook in this case. Similar lack of evidence let Lena Hartog and Tony Alers off the hook. Lena Hartog was the wife of Lammert Hartog, another workman in the warehouse downstairs from the hiding place, a colleague of Van Maren. She occasionally worked as an office cleaner herself. Maybe it was during one of those times she noticed something, or maybe her husband Lammert had his own suspicions and told her about them. Who knows? But there's no proof. Melissa Muller, in her book from 1998, Anne Frank, the biography, did her best to make the case against Lena Hartog stick, but in the end she had to admit that the evidence just wasn't there. Likewise with Tony Alers, Carol Ann Lee tried to make the case that he was the traitor in her book, The Hidden Life of Otto Frank, of 2003. Alers was a lowlife who, before the family went in hiding, had tried to blackmail Otto Frank several times. He said he had knowledge that Otto Frank's firm, Opecta, was selling pectin to the German army. That's a jellying agent. But it's not even sure that he knew of the hiding place, in spite of the fact that he would claim after the war that he was the betrayer of the by now famous author, of course. Even his own family didn't believe him. The most complicated case was the one against Hans van Dijk. Hans van Dijk was a so-called V-Frau. V-Frauen and V-Männer were, it's a German word meaning V stands for vertrouwen, trust. So they were informants, spies who passed on information about resistance fighters and Jews in hiding to the Germans. The V stands for, as I said, vertrouwen, trust. The Germans trusted the information the traitors came up with. Their favorite modus operandi was to be put in the same jail cell as arrested prisoners and Jews who had been arrested while they were in hiding, and during talks in the cell they would gain the trust of the inmate, who would give up details and names of addresses. Hans van Dijk, born in 1905, was Jewish herself. And during her trial after the war, she testified she was scared that she would be deported. So she had turned Veevrouw. For a while, she was the main suspect. Sietse van der Zee has written a book. Sietse van der Zee, a well-known journalist in Holland, has written a book called Vogelvrij, Outlawed, from 2010, and he made a strong case against her, but in the end, again, it could not be proved. As already mentioned, the fact that she was not in Amsterdam on August 1944 made her guilt in the betrayal less than likely. By the way, Hans van Dijk was the only woman to be sentenced to death and executed after the war. The fact that she had betrayed Jews as a Jewish woman herself weighed heavily against her. We will see that the same argument will come back later when we judge the results of the cold case team. A Jew betraying Jews, does that make the case worse? So, 20 to 8, and I'm now down to the investigation. How was this new investigation, this cold case investigation, going to be different? And why did the outcome cause such an uproar? Rosemary Sullivan, the author of the book, is a respectable and respected Canadian professor emeritus of history. Her recent book, for instance, Stalin's Daughter, was well received and the winner of several prizes. We need to bear a few things in mind. There is, in the first place, the scale of the investigation. In 1947, the question who had betrayed the Franks had been one of many thousands of cases. You saw me say that on the clip. The diary had not been published yet. Otto Frank was an unknown name among many. There seemed to be other, even more urgent cases to be tried. Otto Frank and Johannes Kleiman together tried their best to make the case for the betrayal, but they didn't get very far. The forces of justice had their hands more than full. It can therefore be no surprise that the first official investigation failed to produce definitive results. But between the first investigation of 1947-1948 and the one in 1963, something unforeseen happened. During the first one, the one of 47, Otto Frank had been very active in his collaboration with the authorities, even going so far as to make his own inquiries. But during the 1950s, he changed his mind. Maybe connected to two important events in his private life. In 1953, he remarried. Elfriede, or usually Fritzi, Elfriede Markowitz, was herself a victim of betrayal and had lost family members. Her first husband, Erich Geiringer, and her son, Heinz, were both victims of the death marches from Auschwitz to Mauthausen in March and April of 1945. Fritzi survived with her daughter, Eva, who was a few years younger than Anna. Before the war, the Geiringers had lived opposite the Franks on the Merwedeplein in Amsterdam. The two families knew each other, but were not friends. A year earlier, before he got married, in 1952 therefore, Otto Frank had moved from Amsterdam to Basel in Switzerland. He said he found it increasingly difficult to live and work in a place where everything reminded him of his family. Whatever these two events contributed to his change of heart, I can't say with certainty. But the fact is that he apparently wanted to know less and less who had betrayed the hiding place and his family. As he said to me, it won't bring my family back. And revenge, simply for the sake of revenge, wasn't in his nature. Or maybe he did know, but was unwilling to pursue the matter. He even went so far, you heard me tell the story, but I'm telling it here again. He even went so far as to actively deny to Simon Wiesenthal, you probably know the name Simon Wiesenthal, right? To deny to Simon Wiesenthal, who was investigating the case, that he knew the name of the Austrian officer who was in charge of the arrest on August 4th, 1944. He kept referring to Karl Silberbauer as Karl Silbernagel or Karl Silbertaler. Whatever his reasons may be, he felt clearly different about the second investigation. In 2016, two Dutch men, filmmaker Thijs Baaiens and his friend Peter van Twisk, decided to try and solve the mystery once and for all. This time with the help of modern techniques unavailable at the time of the earlier two researchers. In the meantime, I mentioned a few, there had been a number of studies which differed in viewpoint from focusing on one perpetrator, I mentioned 4 or 5 of them, to declaring the whole neighborhood of the Prinsengracht under suspicion, or even that the police raid on the annex was not looking for hidden Jews, but for illegal goods and weapons. In that case, there would not even be an anonymous phone call to investigate. Actually, that is the point of view that the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam these days propagates. That the discovery of the 8 people was, as it were, a random act. I have no idea. Baaiens and van Twisk put together a team of Dutch investigators and researchers. Someone suggested it would be good to have an outside expert on the team, someone independent, unburdened by previous investigations. The name of FBI investigator Vincent Bangkok was mentioned. Just retired from the FBI, Bangkok said yes. He brought with him a world of expertise and a willingness to review previous information, hoping to find new clues. After much fine-tuning, the cold case team came up with a list of 30 people. Using modern techniques like profiling, forensic testing, and a system of algorithms like visual perception and speech recognition, the team was confident that they would come up with the most likely suspect. Bangkok split the team up in a residence project, a statements project, a media project, a mapping project, and an arrest tracking project. By the spring of 2019, the list of the original 30 possibles was reduced to 12 scenarios. Bangkok was confident that the informant had to be among them. By a process of review and elimination, the list became more and more condensed. Eventually, the focus turned to one name, Arnold van den Berg. The discovery of an anonymous note sent to Otto Frank in the summer of 1945 became the central piece of attention. The text on that note was, I'll read it literally to you, your hideout in Amsterdam was reported at the time to the Jüdische Auswanderung, Jewish Immigration Service, in Amsterdam at Terpenstraat, which was the headquarters of the SD, the Sicherheidsdienst, by A. van den Berg. That was it. A. van den Berg. A smoking gun? Far from it. But without a doubt, the closest any investigation had ever come. Who was this Arnold van den Berg? He was born in 1886 and he died in 1950 in London of throat cancer, 64 years old. He studied law, became a lawyer for a while and a notary. Before the war, he was one of only 6 Jewish notaries in Amsterdam. His respectable status made him a prime candidate for membership of the Jewish Council. Some of you may remember that 6 years ago I stood at the same lectern and I spoke about the Jewish Council. So his respectable status made him a prime candidate for membership of the Jewish Council. The council instigated in February 1941 by the Germans to facilitate the deportation of Dutch Jews. He was a member of the council's Commission of 5, the executive committee. 2 other committee members, for those of you who were there 6 years ago, were David Cohen and Abraham Ascher, the 2 chairmen of the Jewish Council. I have, at another occasion, also then, argued that we should pray never to have to make decisions like the Jewish Council of Amsterdam had to. Did they fail? At all too many occasions they did. Would other people have done better? I doubt it. Membership of the Council was a safeguard for the 19 members of the Council against deportation until the Germans disbanded the Council in September 1943. The allegation in the book is that Van den Berg now got scared that his loss, the loss of his privileged status, would get himself and his family, he was married and had 3 daughters, would get himself and his family in trouble, possibly even deported to a concentration camp. Therefore, he would have handed over to the Germans lists of addresses where Jews were hidden. It is imaginable that someone would secretly betray people to save his own skin. It has happened. But to believe that the Jewish Council, or even one member of it, collected lists with addresses of Jews in hiding to use as currency against deportation lacks all credibility. The Jewish Council has been the subject of many studies, particularly in Holland. There was never a shred of evidence that lists, secret or not, of addresses of Jews in hiding did exist. Would German Nazis, I'm just asking the question, I have no answer. Would German Nazis like Willy Lagers, chief of police in Amsterdam, or Ferdinand Ausdierfunten, during their post-war trials, not have tried to make the Jewish Council co-responsible for the deportations? If that was so, would they not have said, yeah, but we got the lists from the Jewish? So, is the puzzle now complete? Have all the pieces locked into place? The desire to have certainty is all too human. We find it unsatisfactory to live with unanswered questions. We definitely have a new name to consider. It could have gone like this. But in the end, all we have is speculation, based on not more than the copy of an anonymous note, not even the original, the copy of an anonymous note which Otto Frank found in the letterbox of Prinsengracht 263 shortly after the war, which said that Van den Berg was the traitor. When you come down to it, all that proves is that there was somebody at the time who believed that and wanted Otto Frank to believe it. To my mind, not more than that and not less than that. Thank you. Oh, let me stay here. No.
You stay there.
Yes.
I'll walk around with the mic. I'm sure there are questions. Well, thank you so much. That was a riveting talk. I was sitting behind my boss with my mouth open.
I would have liked to see that.
Thank you so much. And my question is that I read, I think it was through the Times of Israel, that the Jewish man you were referring to, that who could have been the betrayer, was actually in hiding himself during that time and therefore couldn't conceivably have stepped forward. Is that correct?
I've also heard that rumor. I don't know if it's true. In my mind, the strongest argument against him being the traitor is that the Jewish Council was disbanded, like I said, in September 1943. The betrayal, again, if there was a betrayal, the betrayal was on August 4, 1944. So we are asked to believe that Arnold van den Berg had possibly a list which said Prinsengracht 263, which he sat on from September 43 to August 44. Why? So to me, that's not a very strong case. And also, I don't think that he actually ever went in hiding. So he was scared that his family would be deported first, and maybe himself. But he was a very highly placed, had, as they say, friends in high places. And as such, could he have had the knowledge? I don't know. Otto Frank knew him, but for instance, Miep never knew him. And in all my conversations with Miep, the name Arnold van den Berg never came up. All the other people that I mentioned, Lena Hartog, Hans van Dijk, Willem van Baarn, Tony Alles, they came up in the conversation between, I would say to Miep, how about Tony Alles, and then she would be off. The only thing that there's still an opening is that she once said, when I asked her directly, do you know who was the traitor? She said, I have promised Otto, who was by now, or had died, he died in 1981, I have promised Otto I will never speak about it. And I'm keeping that promise.
Rolf, thank you very much.
Richard.
It fascinates me that there's so much written about the Jewish Council, and that after they were disbanded, I'm children being able to live freely? What
No, they
what
weren't.
is it? They weren't able to
No,
live freely.
no, no.
So you said you didn't go into hiding.
No, not him, but the two chairmen, Abraham Ascher and David Cohen, were both deported to a concentration camp for privileged Jews, and both survived. There were these camps. You probably know about this, but part of a section of Bergen-Belsen
Yes.
was for privileged Jews. A section of Mauthausen was for privileged Jews. So that's how they survived the war. Arnold van den Berg, to my knowledge, was never deported to a concentration camp. No. He had protectors in high places from before.
Surely that makes him more suspicious.
Yeah, that is true. And that I can't answer.
Did you manage to speak to the FBI person, Bangkok, is that his name?
Bangkok.
Afterwards and try and dissuade him from the Vendeck solution? And also, the author, this is two questions, but they're connected. How did the author, Sullivan, get involved in the situation? Was she part of the investigation with Bangkok?
P-A-N-K-O-K-E is how you spell it.
Bangkok.
Bangkok. After he asked me to about my experiences, he asked me in that same phone call if I wanted to become part of the team. It was very flattering, you know. And I toyed with the idea, but then I didn't, and then COVID happened, so I never felt tempted to travel in planes, etc. But I must say, to his honor, he rang me quite frequently. We emailed, and so you may say that he kept me informed about the state of the investigation. He never mentioned the name Arnold van den Berg. Never. And when he called me the last time we spoke was a week before the book came out, so it was 12 January. And I then said, but Vincent, who is the suspect? And he said, oh, there's an embargo on that name until January 18. So, yeah, there are two people. Wow.
I feel very stupid, but I didn't know why the book was banned or why it was being withdrawn. Could you tell me what was the consequence then if it is no longer persona non grata?
Like I said, nowhere has the upheaval been so raucous and violent almost as in Holland. And the publishing company, Antos Ambo, felt it necessary to publish in the Dutch newspapers an apology for not having done due diligence. Because all these journalists and all these historians, my colleagues, were up in arms about what they call the shoddiness of the investigation. They should not have brought it out yet, etc. So,
Is it conclusive in any way? Does it say something?
well, I have given you the conclusion. Bangkok this is one of the arguments against him. Bangkok has said, and he repeats it all the time, that he is for 85 to 87% certain. Is that enough? Sorry, Michiel? No? You don't want to join in? Okay.
Firstly, thank you for an incredible talk. I happen to be a fan of sort of cold case investigations.
Okay.
And the way that you do it, I was sort of riveted because you ask the question and then you say,
turned this into a whodunit that I really enjoyed. But a question that I have is about this anonymous phone call.
Yes.
Were there any records about the phone call? Was there any indication whether it was male or female? Did they have recording devices at the police station
No.
to record these things?
No,
Or
but-
was it just somebody saying there was an anonymous phone call?
Well, this is interesting. Oh, sorry, you asked about Rosemary Sullivan. I'll come back to that. This is actually a very interesting question that you ask. And the reason why is, and this is probably, at least in my mind, almost one of the best chapters in the book. She traces the history of that phone call. And we need to ask ourselves, how did that usually go? If a veeman or a veevrouw would have passed on that information, they probably didn't have to make a call. They could probably just go to the Terpenstraat and just say, you know, investigate that address or that address. But one of the most fascinating chapters is where she says, how did that go? A phone call in 1944. Were there public phone booths in the street? Could you just phone the SD and say, hey, I think there are Jews hiding? You know, how did that work? So, and this is a strange chain of events. The call was made by one of the higher-ups at the SD, the Sicherheitsdienst. His name was Julius Detmann, a German. The call came through that there was a suspicion of Jews hiding at the Prinsengracht 263. Would he investigate? So Julius Detmann, normally not at all involved in this kind of phone call, Julius Detmann went out of his office and saw Karl Silberbauer sitting there and said, put a team together and go to Prinsengracht 263 and find out. And so that, you may say, is almost not proof, but it's almost, it makes Van den Berg more suspicious, because Van den Berg was indeed a highly placed Jew who would have a direct line to Julius Detmann. He had never heard of Silberbauer. He was a sergeant. But Detmann was a, you know, so Van den Berg, the idea is, would have had access to Detmann, and Detmann could, of course, put a team together. Yeah, sorry about Rosemary Sullivan. I don't know who thought of her, put it like that. But she is not an unknown historian. She's a Canadian. Did Bangkok know of her? Did anybody on the Dutch team know of her? But she was asked in a very early stage to make a record of the goings on in the house in Amsterdam North. She doesn't say. I don't know.
Just to go back to the phone call. To go back to the phone call, if Van den Berg makes the phone call and it's described as an anonymous phone call, then what benefit is it to Van den Berg?
We must believe that Van den Berg was not interested in the 7.5 guilders that you got for betraying Jews. I think Van den Berg was building up capital, mental capital. I do you a favor. If the order comes to go on deportation, you do me a favor and take my name off.
Yes, but if they didn't know that it was Van den Berg making.
Yes, yeah, I see what you mean.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's described by everybody as an
as an anonymous phone call, and if it was from the Berg, it was an anonymous. Yeah.
About the note that Otto Frank found in his drawer. You say he made a copy of it.
An Abschrift. Yes.
And what kind of copy does that have to be?
The suggestion is that the original of the note that Otto Frank has had is nowhere to be found. That has never been seen by anybody except Otto Frank. But for his colleague in the office, Johannes Kleiman, remember they were doing investigations on their own in 1947. For his colleague in the office, he made a copy. And so he called that Abschrift, Afschrift, like we call it in Dutch. And then he copied the exact text of the note. So, through a series of completely unexpected, lucky moments, the cold case team found that copy. And they have very stringently subjected that copy to all kinds of tests, even going so far as to compare the text on the note, the copy of the note, to Otto Frank's typewriter, which is still in the Anne Frank house. So the typewriter that was in Otto Frank's office, and it was proven for 100% that the letter imprint of that typewriter were the same letters that appear on the copy.
So that raises another question. There must have been many such things pushed into his mailbox over those years.
And not only his.
All right, everybody else. So there must have been many, and yet this one stands out. For what reason?
Yes, the reason is Anne Frank. But you're quite right. In the Dutch Institute for War Documentation, they keep notes from 1945, 1946, where Dutch people betray or tell on other Dutch people about their unsavory past during the war years. There are 10,000 of those notes. 10,000. They are an untold number of people trying to gain the upper hand, trying to get better than, it's, like I said, the person who claimed that his neighbor had betrayed the Franks, hoping that that neighbor would be arrested, and so that he could move into his apartment. Tens of thousands. So in itself, a note betraying the place where the Frank family had been in hiding was completely invisible in 1945. But of course, after the diary, and you might say that Anne Frank is probably the most, the best known face of the Holocaust. Then of course, that note becomes of grave importance. Okay?
Was the timing of that note ever established?
Yes. Well, we don't know more than summer of 1945.
Because someone could have got to the typewriter at any step and typed that copy. You know what I'm saying?
Do you make it seem as if typewriters were in 1945 something that were freely available?
No, the Frank typewriter was there.
Yes.
Obviously.
Yes.
Obviously it was there. So the fact that that note was typed on that typewriter.
Yes.
When?
Oh, when? Yes.
The when I'm asking.
Yeah,
because
but
it could have been false.
yeah.
That's very nice.
No, it's true. Of course, they went much further than just looking at the letters, the imprint of the letters. determine the age of the paper.
Yes, but, as I say,
Yes. Other people, Johannes Kleiman, had made notes on the same paper. The ink of the pen that he used was, that was a very thorough part of the investigation. I do not doubt that the copy, it may have been a little later than the summer of 1945, when Otto found the original in his letterbox, but it will have been 1946, 1947. That is almost certain.
And Otto said that he got it.
He did, yes. Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, Michiel.
You yourself live in the United States. You have seen how the book was launched there.
Mm-hmm.
I take it that the book also appeared in Israel.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how the book was? I know about all the trouble that the book, all the chaos around the book in Holland.
Yes.
But now the rest of the world, how does the feedback from the people who are now looking at, maybe in South Africa, I don't know.
No. I can only say what I know about America. Just ahead of the publication of the book, there was a installment of 60 Minutes, the CBS program, on a Sunday night, and in which Bangkok was interviewed, and they more or less announced the publication of the book. So for a few days, there was a lot written about it, but not any more critical than the cold case team claims to have finally exposed the name of the traitor. The response was such that I also got a phone call from a journalist from Der Spiegel in Germany, but she lived in Arizona. And she wanted my take on this whole thing. I hadn't even read the book. So I hope that the things I have said to Der Spiegel are not completely foolish. But actually, there's always happening so much in America that it's 2 or 3 days, and then it dies down. So I must say that there are institutions now in America asking me to talk about it, but that's very low key, I would say.
But people, from your knowledge, are not feeling offended as they are in Holland. I live around the corner where the Terpenstraat,
Yes.
And I went to visit the bookstore, which is there, and they said we don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
It's an insult.
Yeah. Why?
It's an insult because the fact that you suggest without 100% proof, without 100% evidence, that you are only suggesting that Jews are betraying Jews. Is such an offense.
Yeah, that was also the thing in Israel. For many people in Israel, it was sort of, oh yeah, here we go again, Jews betraying Jews, etc. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a valid point, I must say.
I find it valid if it's not true.
Right. But the palaver that has blown up in the Netherlands about ethical questions like, is it legitimate to give the name of somebody who is now forever tainted with having betrayed the family, is that ethical? But we have done that with all the others as well, you know. How about the family of Willem van Meyer, of Hans van Dijk, you name it, you know. Those people have been out in public eye for a long, long time. So what is now different?
Well, the one difference is that it's a Jew.
Yeah, Hans van Dijk is also a Jew.
And yes, but she was known to be a weervrouw. She was this man is somebody else. He's a member of an esteemed member of the Jewish community of
Right.
Amsterdam.
Yes.
So it's a very different thing, and it is an inconvenient truth if you happen to be Jewish, because if it's a truth in inverted commas, then what this does is it creates a mythology which then perpetuates an anti-Semitic trope, which is very, very dangerous.
I'm well aware of it, Richard.
So this is the problem with this book. You cannot be 87% sure. You have to be 100% sure before you go to print. Because unfortunately, and of course the cat is out of the bag. So what is terribly worrying about this book is if it is indeed found to be fallacy or not, it doesn't matter.
No.
The book is as if you've said something. When you've said something and it's out there, then this becomes the truth. And it will be held onto by many, many people because it is a convenient truth in that sense.
Yeah, no.
So this is the very worrying thing about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, shall we?
Well, I think we could. The reality is that people love cold cases. People love conspiracy theories. And people love to make money on other people. And I agree with Richard that if you're not 100%, the book should never be published. But it would be very interesting to know is how much they all made. But
Do you want me to find out?
Why not? But I'd like to thank you very much for taking time out of your holiday to come and spend the evening with us.
I have loved it.
We've really enjoyed it, and I think I can say that for all of us.
Thank you.
It was really a pleasure having you. And this is just a token of our appreciation. I'm sure that when you look at the book, you will see many faces that you recognize from your time in South Africa.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Travel safely, and we hope to see you soon.
I hope so too.